scripture reading this morning is from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verses 13 through 16. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
This the light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This the light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This the light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Picture it. McPherson, summer 1978. My family going camping. Great American pastime, camping. My family used to go camping a lot in the summer, and my parents, bless their brave hearts, would pack up me and my sister and my 3 older stepbrothers and our neurotic poodle, Kizzy, and all of our tents and sleeping bags and the first aid kit and all the camping equipment that we had amassed over the years and put them all into the back of our gigantic brown and tan 1970s conversion van. This thing was a beast. It had 2 rows of seats behind the driver's and the front passenger seat, and behind those seats our parents had installed a bed and some cabinets which functioned as a kind of a camper for them while the kids slept in tents. Now, here's some music information for you all. It's important to note that this awesome van came complete with an 8-track player. You can tell the over 50s, they're all laughing already. And this 8-track player was always cranking out such iconic tunes as Mamas Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys, and Amy Stewart's disco classic, Knock on Wood. I asked David if we could sing that last one here this morning, but he said it isn't in the hymnal. So now we've set the stage for how amazing these family camping trips actually were. We would drive to Canopolis, or sometimes Wilson, or Marion, and it would take Dad forever to find a spot he liked, despite how helpful we all were shouting out our opinions from the back of the van. But we'd finally find a good spot, and we'd put up our tents, and we would unroll our sleeping bags, and then us kids would race down to the lake to swim. And my stepbrothers would chase me with dead fish that they found, or if no fish carcasses were available, they'd chase me with this completely disgusting catfish bait. You know what I'm talking about? We called it stink bait. And my sister would laugh and my brothers would chase me some more, and frankly, it's a wonder I'm not in therapy as we speak. But the best thing about camping was nighttime. Dad would make a big fire, and Mom would get out all the great snack stuff, and we'd sit around and talk and laugh and tell stories. And we would always have those cans of squirt cheese, which we'd eat on crackers. Absolutely awesome. Camping food at its best. And when the cheese was gone, we would, I cannot believe I'm about to admit this from the pulpit. Kids, don't try this at home. Whoever finished the cheese would throw the can into the fire and yell, "Cheese bomb!" And we'd all jump up and run back a safe distance, and the can would explode, and we'd all laugh our heads off and come back and sit down and start another can of cheese. I expect by this point, all of the stories that I tell you about my childhood explain a lot about why I am the way I am. So we'd spend these long summer evenings around the campfire, and it would slowly get darker and darker But we had the fire in front of us, and that fire kept the darkness behind us. When it was time to hike up the hill to the bathhouse to shower before bed, we always found our way back to our campsite by looking for that fire. And I can still, if I close my eyes, hear the sound of the coyotes howling in the distance and echoing across the stillness of the lake at night. They sounded mournful and terrifying, even though I knew they were far away from where I was. And there were always sounds in the trees and in the grass, but nothing seemed threatening as long as that fire was burning. But imagine how different it would be if Dad would have said, "Nope, sorry, this is my fire. You all go fend for yourselves." Or got it going nice and bright and then dumped sand on it. Jesus is talking about this sort of big light in this passage from Matthew. He's calling us to be a light in the world, a light by which others can see, a light by which their path is illuminated and they can find their way home to God. Now, just for context purposes, let's broaden our view here a bit. This passage is part of Jesus' famous Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount is where we find the basic tenets of our beliefs. Just before this passage, Jesus preaches the Beatitudes, the blessed are those. And I think we can easily tie what he says here in with the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. And the list, of course, goes on, but this is what Jesus wants us to be. And by living our lives according to what he lays out for us here, we are readying ourselves to be the light of the world that he asks us to be in the very next passage. Now, I can't read this passage without thinking, of course, of the little ditty we just heard, "This Little Light of Mine." It's kind of a part of the soundtrack of the life of anybody who grew up in the church. It's a bouncy little Sunday school ditty, but it is full of good, solid theology that is based 100% on what Jesus tells us in this passage from Matthew. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Part of my vision for my ministry is to reignite the church. And when I say the church, I mean the global Christian church. When I flew out here last summer for the first time as part of my interview process for this position, the pastoral nominating committee put me with Keith and parked us at Scuttlebutts and made sure we had plenty of coffee and then just turned us loose. We talked for literally hours. It was hours, wasn't it? Hard to believe, I know. But we realized within the first few minutes that we share a vision for FPC Hutchinson. We're both excited about our individual calls to serve this church, and we want to empower and ignite each of you to go out into the world and share the love of Jesus with others. Because that's how light works, isn't it? When we turn on our light, others can see. And when they can see, they can find their own light and turn it on so that others can see. That's what we want for this congregation. This is what we want for the whole Christian movement. Too much darkness has slipped in. We need to turn on our lights and be the light of the world. We tend to keep our light to ourselves sometimes. I'm not saying we do this all the time, but I know too well how easy it is to come to church, get our souls fed, and go back into the world and not share our light with others. And there are, I think, quite a few reasons that we do this. I know someone who will not socialize with anyone who isn't a Christian. She will only patronize Christian-owned businesses as much as possible, and basically takes a kind of a surreptitious secret handshake type of approach to her faith that is safe and non-threatening, and frankly doesn't do much to help others see Christ or to, as Jesus says here, glorify the Father in heaven. Our Christianity, our faith, has to be visible. We can't be secret Christians. Discipleship doesn't work that way. When I was a kid, and people would occasionally raise their hands in praise during church, or my grandmother would make us all say grace when we were out to eat at a restaurant, I was embarrassed. Yes, I was a Christian. I was baptized when I was 13, but I didn't see why everybody had to make such a big, obvious deal about it. God knew I loved him. Wasn't that doing enough? I now know that no, it wasn't. If Jesus and the disciples had only ever talked amongst themselves and never reached out to others, guess what? We wouldn't be sitting here today. So it's our responsibility as Christians to live out our faith in a way that is visible to others so that they will see Jesus through us and God will be glorified in our lives. Hide it under a bushel? No, I'm going to let it shine. It can be hard, I know. Sometimes it's scary. Religion has become a dirty word to much of our society. Worse, it's become a political word. Politicians use Christian as a label. But what happens to society's view of Christianity when those politicians become embroiled in a sex scandal or are caught embezzling or in some other way drag a big, ugly black mark across the name of Christian? What can we do? What can we, as Christians, as the body of Christ, what can we do? Well, it's literally impossible for us to address the issue with all of the offenders directly, and frankly, I'm not sure that would be the best approach even if we could. So I'll tell you what we do. We take our light out from under the bushel basket. We do as Jesus told us and let our light shine so brightly that the darkness is chased away. We can't win by fighting ugliness with ugliness or darkness with darkness. That's not Jesus' way, and it can't be ours. And in this verse from Matthew, Jesus is very direct. We must let our light shine so that the world may see our good deeds and through us see and glorify God. This is a huge responsibility. Jesus is telling us that the world is watching us, that we are God's representatives. This is not something we can take lightly. This is serious stuff. Pope Francis gave a sermon on this same passage of Scripture not long ago. Incidentally, I happen to think Pope Francis is an excellent example of somebody who not only talks the talk, but walks the walk. I mean, I know he's Pope and all, but still. In his message, the Pope made a point of saying that one thing Christians need to be aware of is not shining the light on ourselves. Now, I know this gets a little tricky. We want to be good examples of Christianity, and we want others to see the love of Christ and the grace of God shining through us. But we have to be careful not to make it about us. The Pope calls this mirror spirituality, and quite bluntly says it's a bad thing. Now, I want you to think for a moment about the people you know who are lights of the world. I'd be surprised if some of you right away don't think of some people in this very room. What makes their light shine so brightly? Who led you to Christ? Even if it happened when you were just a little kid, like it did for many of us, I'll bet you still remember. There was still someone who was that example for you. What was it about them that made you realize you wanted to be a Christian too? Is that person still living? If they are, have you told them how much their example meant to you? Tell them. Pick up the phone or write them a letter and tell them how much them letting their little light shine changed your life. If they're no longer with us, tell them anyway. You can still write them a letter or tell God the next time you're praying how thankful you are to and for that person. This kind of spiritual joining together to let our lights shine is the best way to drive out the darkness, just as sure as when you walk into your bedroom at night and hit the light switch. Won't let Satan it out. I'm going to let it shine. It is tempting, believe me, I know, to get angry with the world as it is these days, to look for people to blame, to get mad and lose our cool and make explosive posts on Facebook, or find ourselves neck deep in arguments at parties or family dinners. Believe me, I have done all of those things. And this, as I'm sure we've all learned the hard way, doesn't fix anything. As writer and fellow Christian Madeleine L'Engle once said, we draw people to Christ not by loudly discrediting what they believe or by telling them how wrong they are and how right we are, but by showing them a light that is so lovely that they want with all their hearts to know the source of it. The world needs light. The world needs our light. We live in a world where Christianity is sometimes treated like a punchline, but this world needs us. The opportunity to let our little lights shine is greater now than it has ever been. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. And no, it's not easy. I will be the first to admit that the temptation to just spend time with and around other Christians who share our thoughts, who share our beliefs, is so great. No hassles, no problems. But while it's important to be part of a faith community for support and fellowship, if we confine ourselves to that, we're hiding our light under a bushel basket. And that's not a comfortable thing to hear, but I think we know that's the truth. So how do we handle it? This business of letting our light shine in a dark world, how do we handle it? And the answer, of course, is Jesus. In the natural world, the source of light is the sun, the S-U-N, sun. The sun illuminates the world, but it doesn't actually shine directly on us. You probably remember this from science class. Instead, its light is reflected off of the objects all around us. It's the same way in our spiritual world. The source of light is Jesus, the S-O-N, sun. His light is reflected on the world off of millions of believers like us. We get our light from him. We see by his light, and we reflect it so that others may see him through us. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. The kind of light that Jesus is talking about here is a big light. The kind of light that illuminates and helps others find their way, lights against the stumbling blocks of darkness. When kids sing "This Little Light of Mine," they hold up one finger because they're singing about a little light, a kid-sized light. And that's great, but the light Jesus is calling for us to be in the world is bigger than this. It's bigger than the campfire that kept the scary night at bay during my family's camping trips. It's the kind of light that results from all of us letting our light shine. When my dad made the campfires on our camping trips, he didn't start when it was already dark out. He started while it was still light. He started by asking us kids to help him gather wood from the area, branches and twigs that had fallen off trees and were dry enough to use. So we'd all pitch in, and we'd gather as much as we could carry. And Dad would take all that we brought and arrange it in that special secret dad way, you know, they have of lighting campfires and fireplaces and barbecues. And he'd put a match underneath the pile, and we'd watch as that first tiny flame would grab a hold of a dry twig, and the fire would start to slowly spread. And all of us kids knew how to fan it just enough to keep the oxygen going so that the fire would get bigger and bigger. And by the time the darkness had fallen, the fire was a big, cheery, bright, crackling blaze. This is the kind of light that Jesus wants us to be in the world. I know it's hard to comprehend being that kind of light by yourself, but you aren't by yourself. You're part of a huge worldwide community of believers. And if each of us carries some kindling to add to the fire, guess what? It gets huge. Jesus is calling us in this passage from Matthew and in the words of everyone's favorite Sunday school sing-along to reflect his light on our dark world so that everyone will see the beautiful love and grace of our God. My challenge to each of us this week is to figure out a way to bring some branches to our communal fire. Reach out to someone in need. Call someone who is alone. Visit someone in a nursing home. Some of my greatest friendships in my life started that way. There are always residents who don't have family nearby. Send someone a card. Buy the coffee of the person behind you in line. Smile at somebody on the street. There are a million ways to light a spark in the world. And even one spark is enough to get that fire burning brightly. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.